All right, now we've got some others have joined in, and for those of you that have just joined in, we're doing this now every week, same time, Monday we'll start at 6 o'clock. Trying to clear up any issues, things you may not understand while you're taking the course, and we want to be here to help. Hopefully you'll find that it does. But feel free to ask any questions at all. I'll be more than happy to answer them. Anybody?
I had another one. What kind of like we was just speaking on, I want to buy your house. And I said, hey, Frank, I want to buy your house. And you said, okay, it's for $150,000. I accept. No, I said, I want the furniture with it. I want the furniture with it. And you counter back and you say, 155 with the furniture. And then I counter back 160, but I don't add the furniture. And then you accepted the last offer, but you didn't mention the furniture. Like, how do I know how do I know which one is your actual offer?
Well, we got a couple things here. We got a couple things we need to clear up there. Number one, you cannot include personal, because furniture is personal property, right?
Okay.
And you cannot include personal property in the price of the house, which would be considered real property. Okay.
Okay.
So if the buyer wants furniture or any type of personal property to be included,
we have to do a bill of sale.
There you go. Now you got to have a bill of sale, but no personal property should be negotiated in the contract of sale, because you can only convey real property via contract of sale. Personal property has to be agreed upon by bill of sale. So really that's two different contracts.
Okay.
Two different documents. Okay.
I have a question. It's unrelated to what you guys are talking about, but I'm getting ready to take my final classroom exam. I was just curious about how often you guys are offering that right now.
For the classroom, you said?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Well, my short answer, I don't know, because Ashley, she's our office manager. She handles that. But I think she can schedule that pretty quick. I mean, pretty much anytime you want to do it right now. You just let her know when you want to do it.
And that's something I have to go to a location to do. It's not going to be online like I've been doing the other modules and things like that.
Typically, you would have to go to a proctored location like Midlands Technical College or something like that. But I don't think that's a requirement right now because of the COVID issues. They've lifted some of the requirements because of COVID. So I think, now you can talk to Ashley about this, and this is who you need to talk to. And again, Ashley, that's our office manager at school, but I think you can do it right there from your home. But it has to be on like a Zoom like we're doing right now. So she'll have to be able to see you. And I know none of you have your videos on right now, but when you're taking that test, you have to have the video on. We have to see you.
Okay. I got you. Okay. All right. That was my question.
Very good.
Hi, Frankie. This is JJ. How are you?
JJ.
I have a question concerning tenancy, life tenancy, and remainder man. So I've taken a couple of sample tests. I'm finished my modules, ready to take the test, but I'm sort of still getting confused on remainder man, meaning I've had a couple of samples where it's stating that the person who has the life interest or the life estate interest in the property could not take out a mortgage without having the remainder man's signature also on the loan. So I just needed some understanding on that.
Where did you hear that?
That it was in a test.
In my book?
Now that part I don't recall.
Yeah, I don't think that was in mine.
Okay, so
because you know, here's the thing: the person that owns the life estate, that's the person. Excuse me. That's the person we call the life tenant.
right.
They own that property, and it's theirs. And they can do pretty much anything they want to do with it. But because they're the life tenant, they only own it for as long as they're alive. Okay. Once they die, I mean, the second they die, obviously they no longer own any interest in that estate. It now goes over to whoever the remainder man is, or whoever was named as remainder man, the person with remainder interest. All right. But the reality is that now I don't think this would be very common. But if I'm the life tenant of this property or this estate, could I decide to sell the property or do whatever I want to do with it? Yes, I can, because it's mine. I'm alive. I'm still alive, which means I own it, and I can do anything I want to do with it. But here's where the problem would come in. Say I sold it to John, and let's just say Mary was the person, is the remainder man, the person with remainder interest. Okay. If John can certainly buy the property from me if I'm willing to sell it to him, but John needs to understand he's only going to own that property for as long as I'm alive. Because the moment I die, who now owns all that property or that estate? I forgot who I said. Who does it? Mary?
The female, Mary.
Yeah. It then goes to them. So from a reasonable standpoint, who would want to buy a life estate knowing that it's going to be short term or potentially short term, right?
Okay.
Now, having said that, could the person that gave me the life estate or left it to me, could they have put restrictions on it saying you can't sell it or you can't refinance it or do anything? Yes, they could do that, but absent any restrictions with what I own, I can do anything I want to do with it.
So the lender then would not require Mary to also sign off on a loan if they wanted to take out a mortgage.
Okay, now that's a little bit different there, because see, the lender's not going to loan money on a life estate without knowing the person with remainder interest is okay with it, because at the end of the day, that lender knows that if the remainder person does not accept, does not say I'll pay it back,
sure,
then they're not going to loan the money.
Okay.
It's just the lender's trying to protect their interest.
Okay, that's clear.
Okay, very good.
So much.
Question. Anything else? And by the way, y'all, you don't have to, if you don't have a question about life estates, for example, doesn't matter. Any question, any subject matter. Shoot, I'll do the best I can.
Can you just go over like who gets the credit or who gets the debit when at closing, when the taxes is due? Like when you get ready to close and I already paid the taxes, on the home, but now you got to pay so much. Like, how can you touch a little bit on the credit? Who gets the credit and who gets the debit?
Yeah, be glad to. And now one thing it depends on what you're dealing with on who gets debited and who gets credited. Okay, so I'm going to address taxes, for example, because that's what you specifically said. But here's what you got to understand. Let's say, for example, today is, what is it, April the 12th, I think it is.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's say we're closing today, April the 12th. Well, obviously, the property taxes the seller's responsible for the taxes from January 1st through today, April 12th, right?
Mm-hmm.
Seller, whatever that amount of taxes would be, you're responsible to pay that. Then the buyer is responsible for whatever the taxes are from today, April 12th, through the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
But here's how we have to prorate this. And what the attorney will do, because they're the ones that handle all this, they'll have to figure out, well, how much are the taxes for the whole year? And y'all, let's just for example, let's just say it was $1,200. I'm just making up a number. It's $1,200 for the full year, right? Well, then what you would have to do is now we got to figure out, of that $1,200, how much is the seller responsible for and how much of it is the buyer responsible for? So the way you would do it, you would take the $1,200, because we need to know how much would that equate to per day, right? And we typically use a 360-day year when we're calculating, we're doing prorations. And I think that's what they're going to require you to do on the exam. And if you're not sure what that means, if a 360-day year means you have to assume there are 30 days in every month, okay? Regardless of how many there really are. I know every month does not have exactly 30 days, but for proration purposes, you must assume there are 30 days in every month using a 360-day year. So if you take the 1,200 divided by the 360 days, then that would give you, and I don't have a calculator right in front of me, but that would tell you how much the taxes are per day, right? Well, to figure out how much the seller owes, and I'm just making up say it was $2 a day. I know that's not the right number, but let's just say it was $2 a day. Well, now we got to, well, how many days since January 1st through today did the seller actually own? How many days was that? Well, you got January, February, March. That's 3 full months, 30 days a month. So that's 90 days right there, right? Plus 12 days of April. So that's what, 102 days, right? So you take the 102 days times the $2 per day. That's how much the seller is responsible for. Anybody know how much that would be? Was that $204? Is that right?
Correct.
All right. So here's why that's important. Because when the tax bill comes out, and by the way, in case you don't know, y'all, when do they send the tax bills out every year? It's usually around October, maybe November, but towards the end of the year. So even though the buyer's closing today, they're going to own the house today. When the tax bill comes out at the end of the year, they're going to send the bill for the whole amount for the whole year. Okay, the county's not going to prorate that tax bill. So whoever the current owner is when the bill comes out, that's what they owe. So obviously the seller is responsible for that. What was it? $204 of that they owe. So the way we're going to resolve the problem, seller, you're going to give that $204 to the buyer at closing. So buyer, you're going to get that money from the seller at closing. And then you're going to have to pay whatever the full amount is, the whole year's worth when the bill comes out. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So in that situation, you'd have a $204, which is debited from the seller and credited to the buyer at closing.
Gotcha.
Okay. Now, just to kind of flip flop this a little bit, say you've got the house is subject to regime fees, HOA regime fees. Well, it works the same way. You have to prorate it. You got to figure out how much of the annual regime fees, divide it by 360, figure out what the daily amount would be. And then again, you got the 102 days, right, for that the seller owns. And then you got to figure out how many days the buyer owns. But see, here's the difference. When it comes to HOA fees, usually the HOA will bill at the beginning of the year. Okay. So in this situation, if we're closing today, chances are the seller's already paid for the full year for HOA, right? So what we got to do now is figure out how many days is the buyer going to own the house from April 12th through the end of the year. And then multiply that times whatever that daily amount would be. And then buyer, you got to give that back to the seller. So for HOAs, then you'd have a debit from the buyer side at closing and a credit back to the seller. Is that, y'all follow me there?
Yes.
So it really depends on what it is that we're dealing with, because taxes, or whether it be taxes or regime fees or whatever, if it's already been paid by the seller, then obviously we got to debit that, take the buyer, what they owe from the buyer, give it to the seller. If the buyer's going to wind up having to pay it all at the end of the year, then we got to do it the opposite way. Yeah, I hope I didn't confuse you with all that, but does that make sense or make it worse?
No, it makes sense.
Okay. All right. Anybody else?
It's JJ again. I have another question.
Okay, JJ.
One of the sample test questions stated that 6 months after the buyer bought the house, the roof leaked during a rainstorm, and it gave examples of who could be sued, whether it was the broker for non-disclosure, or you could not sue the broker, or if it was the seller who would be sued, or you couldn't do anything because you did not do an inspection. But I believe the answer was that you could sue the broker for non-disclosure. Why the broker and not the seller in this particular situation? Because the seller told the broker that the roof leaked, but they did not disclose it. Or why not both?
Well, again, I would have to know the exact, because I'm going to tell you that can get kind of iffy there. I wish I had the exact question that you should read to me. Okay. And what the options were, but at the end, have you got the exact question?
I do.
Okay, well, let's hear it.
Okay, hold on. 6 months after a buyer bought a house, the roof leaked during a rainstorm. When the house was listed, the seller told the broker that the roof leaked, but they agreed not to tell any prospective buyers. The broker claims that the buyer did not ask about the roof. Under these facts, the buyer, and the options are, can sue the broker for non-disclosure required by license law, cannot sue the broker under the license law, can sue the seller under license law, cannot do anything because the leaking roof could have been discovered by an inspection.
And what answer did we say it was?
Can sue the broker for non-disclosure required by license law.
Okay, yeah, because that would be the best of the options.
Okay.
And I got to tell you, I hate those kind of questions with a passion. Because look, at the end of the day, both the seller and the broker, the listing broker, are potentially negligible here. Because the law says defects, known defects must be disclosed. So there's really no option here. You don't get the choice to decide, well, let's just decide we're not going to disclose it. Well, you don't have that option. The law says you must disclose it.
Right.
So even if the broker says, you know, don't worry about it, we're not, if they don't ask or they don't do that, or what, don't worry about it, that's wrong. The seller does, or excuse me, the buyer does not have to ask, does the roof leak? Because the law already says you got to tell us that, period. So given the answers, you know, if one of your options, they could sue both the broker and the seller.
Sure.
That would probably be the better. But given what I heard you say,
Sure.
then I would have to say the broker. But
and is it, we can't sue the seller under license law because of the phrase license law?
well, there you go. That's a good point. That's an
Okay.
excellent point.
Okay.
But I will tell you, there are other laws that require the seller to disclose those defects.
Okay.
So yeah, that could be, yeah, that's kind of a tricky one there. But that's a good point, under license law.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
See, that's why you got to pay attention to these questions. They sometimes they get really ridiculous. Any more? Good questions, by the way. And let me just say too, I know a couple of you or some of you are like chatting. I'm not sure if you're asking a question, but I can't see the chat the way I'm set up right now. So if you got a question, you got to ask it because I can't see it.
I just asked, will we have to bring our own calculator to the test? And someone answered it for me.
Typically you do, but I have heard people say, if you just don't bring it, they may have one give you, but I would not bank on, I wouldn't rely on, but you have to bring your own calculator. You're supposed to.
Okay.
Okay. Any more?
One of the questions, I think it was, Mrs. Hill is a relative and wanted me to list her house. So they listed the house. It was like a 2-part. And I guess my question is, I know I would have to say that she is a relative, but also can I still with somebody else inside the office, the broker's office?
I'm sorry, I missed what, say the last question. What was the final question?
I guess in the broker's office, like within the company, if somebody came in, do I still have to put on there that they're related to me?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, well, having said that, the way the law reads, if it's I think it says if it's a close relative,
right,
I think
right.
Then you have to disclose that relationship. Now, I got to tell you, I hate when they leave something that broad in the law, because then the question, well, what's close? Is a cousin a close relative? I don't know. So my suggestion is, in fact, what I tell when I'm actually teaching class, my advice to any real estate agent, if you have any kind of relationship other than strictly professional, business, anything else, I would disclose what that relationship is.
Okay.
Just to be safe. So nobody come and say, well, you never told us that. I will tell you what I'm going to give you an example, which goes way beyond what the law requires. But, I've listed houses for sale that are neighbors, like next door or 2 doors down or whatever. We have no relationship other than they're my neighbor, right? Or maybe a friend or whatever. So, but when I put that listing out there, I always put in the listing, seller is neighbor of agent. I just disclose it. I've actually helped high school friends, people that I knew back in high school. That's been a couple of years ago. Actually called me and want me to help them buy a house. Well, I'll put that in the offer. Buyer is high school friend of the agent. Again, that's way beyond more than what the law, I think, requires. But again, how do you decide what a close relationship or a close relative would be? So I just disclose if I have any kind of relationship with or anybody I'm representing, other than just strictly business, then I disclose what the relationship is. I always do. I think you're better safe than sorry that way. Next. Nothing else?
With confidentiality, if you like are talking to somebody and you tell them like, oh, I had a client that, you know, did this, this, and this, but you don't say who they are, is that okay or no?
It's probably not a good idea. Now, having said that, especially, you know, because I teach and I also do a real estate talk show. I do a radio show. You know, a lot of times I'll talk about things that I've seen, dealt with, you know, just to try to, you know, give an example of something I might be trying to, a point I'm trying to make. Now, having said that, if it's somebody I'm currently working with, absolutely not. I wouldn't say nothing about it. But I would never, ever say anything that would give anybody an inkling of who this could be referring to or about, right? To answer your question, you're probably going to be a lot better off. You keep confidential information to yourself.
Okay.
But having said that, I can use examples without giving a specific instance and without giving a specific person, right? That way I didn't give away anybody or any particular deal or transaction or stuff like that. But at the end of the day, your fiduciary obligation is to protect your client. And if they told you something that they intend to be confidential, then I suggest you keep it that way, or they could have a problem with you.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any more?
This is JJ again.
JJ.
I think for the last time. Is it accurate that a licensee has to turn their license back into the commission if their broker's license is suspended?
Well, it is, but it's not the way it sounds really a lot of times. But what happens, because see, when you're issued your license, your company will be on that license, right? Whatever company you're with. And the way the law reads, the broker in charge is the company. The company is the broker in charge. You know, just for example, if the company were to get sued for some reason, then guess who's getting sued? You can't just, you got to sue, a company can't write a check. Somebody got to write a check, right?
Okay.
So who is getting sued? The broker in charge.
The broker.
So the way the law reads, you cannot differentiate between the broker in charge and the company. They're one and the same. Well, the company that you're licensed with has to be on your license. So the assumption is if the broker in charge loses their license, then the company does not exist either, right?
Okay.
So obviously you would be transferred or move into a different company. Not that you've done anything wrong, but you would have to transfer to another broker in charge. Well, you'd have to turn your license in and they'd have to print you another license that has the new broker in charge information on it.
Okay.
It doesn't mean that you've done anything wrong or anything like that. It's just that your broker in charge is no longer licensed, so therefore your license is no good. You'll have to get a new license under a different broker in charge.
Okay, that's helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I know we got questions.
Can you still close? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Nicole. Let's go with Nicole first and we'll go back to whoever else had a question.
If you do not turn in the property disclosure statement, can you still close?
Yes. Because one of the, remember there are
3 days.
Technically, there are 15 exemptions to the property condition disclosure statement. There's really only 13 that deal with real estate. 2 of them deal with timeshares. So if you're not dealing with a timeshare, there's 13. And in fact, the exemption number 13 allows the buyer, as long as the buyer agrees in writing that the seller does not have to provide that property disclosure, then the seller is exempt. So therefore, you could go ahead and close without having the property disclosure statement.
But they have to sign.
Yes, the buyer has to agree in writing.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And then who was it? Brianna? Did you have a question?
Could you explain vicarious liability?
Oh yeah, that's a good one. In fact, this is probably why you never want to be the broker in charge, is because of that vicarious liability. Basically, and just to give you an example, might help explain it a little bit better. But let's say let's say I'm the broker in charge and you're one of my licensees. You're licensed under me. Well, obviously, you're going to be out there actually dealing with the buyer and the sellers, right? Not me, you are. Is it possible that there could be something going on with this transaction that obviously you know about that I would not know about because you never told me about it, right? Because I'm not the one dealing or handling that transaction. You are. Well, vicarious liability under the law just means if the licensee knew something, then by law, the broker in charge knew it. Whether they actually did or not is really irrelevant. So could I be liable for things going on that should not be going on with a transaction, even though I did not know about it? Yes. Because the way the law sees this is if you're the broker in charge, then you should have known. Why didn't you know about it? If Brianna knew about it, then why didn't you know about it, Frankie? Right? Because the law does say, as the broker in charge, one of the duties of the broker in charge is we have to supervise. The broker in charge should know what's going on. Now, that's a lot easier said than done, because I could ask you all day long, Brianna, how things going? Everything going good with this deal? You're not having any problems, are you? And could there be problems and you just choose not to tell me about it? Well, how am I going to know that? But under the law, under vicarious liability, because you knew about it, then I should have known about it as well. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Okie dokie. Is this helping at all?
Yes.
Okay.
So Frankie, this is JJ again.
Okay.
In the test questions, if information is not provided to really give you the full facts, it seems tricky sometimes that the answers are based on facts we don't have. Is there a recommendation on the best way to choose the correct answer? Well,
I totally get what you're saying. I totally get it. Look, I've had to take these tests too. And I don't like a lot of the questions, the way they read them. I mean, the way they word the questions. But at the end of the day, they're going to tell you there was enough information. Now let me say this, this might help a little bit. When you're reading these questions, where you can make a mistake is when you start assuming things that is not stated in the question.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, you start reading into the question, you start adding to the question, or in some cases, taking away from the question. So I will tell you even when I'm teaching in class, and I'll be trying to explain something in particular, and I'll have a student come back and say, but Frankie, if this buyer did this or that, then this would be the right answer. Okay, well, I never said they did this or that. Why are you assuming they did this or that? I never said they did that. So assuming they didn't do it, then the answer I've got would be the right answer, if that makes sense. So where you can get in where you can get yourself hung up is when you start assuming things that's not what they're asking. So you got to make sure you know exactly what they're asking. Don't add anything to that question. Don't add to it, and don't take away from it. We got to answer the question the way it reads. Again, I don't like some of them. I don't. I wish there was something I could do about it, but at the end of the day, I don't write the questions, and they won't let me write them. So.
And the question that came up that did not have information was discussing a homeowner who wanted to pay off a loan early. It doesn't state how much his mortgage is. And the question is, really, can he be charged a prepayment penalty? But the answer had to do with, because the homeowner's loan is more than $180,000, the lender may charge a prepayment. But we don't have that information.
Okay. Well, okay. Now that one I can address because I'm familiar with that question.
Okay.
And again, I don't like them, but it is what it is. But the way they worded the answer, basically, they told you what the loan amount was in the answer. Because it said the answer is because the loan amount is greater than 180,000, they can charge a prepayment penalty. So they basically, the information you were looking for in the question was basically provided in the answer. They told you the loan amount was greater than 180,000 in the answer.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So assuming it's greater than 180,000, can they charge a prepayment penalty? Yes, they can.
Tricky. Okay.
It is. And that's the kind of stuff you just got to get ready for, get used to it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Next. This is good stuff right here. Good questions. Nobody else got a question?
I was just trying to look. Next time I have them all written down like I did some of them.
Well, like I say, every Monday night, we're going to start doing this. Hopefully this will be very helpful and useful when more people will start to know about it and join in.
Okay.
Because I know for me, if I was doing this, I would be interested just in hearing what everybody else, what their questions were and what the answers were.
Yes.
Good review.
Do you know when you'll be back in the classroom?
No, not exactly. I don't. What I do know is they've extended us to be able to teach through Zoom, live through Zoom, through the end of the year. Now, I don't know that they're going to, I don't think that means you can't go back in the classroom. We just got to play it. Right now, we just don't know. It's really kind of up in the air right now.
Gotcha.
I'd like to say thank you because this is helpful for me.
Well, thank you, JJ. I did it just for you.
I appreciate it.
Even though you don't have your picture up there. Talking to all these ghosts.
What can you say is something that people mess up on the most on the exam?
Mess up most. Well, here's where I think, where I see probably the biggest number one mistake. Changing answers. Because at least in the classroom, it's not on. So when we're in the classroom, it's actually a written test, right? You just bubble in the answer and turn it in. So I can see if you change your answer, I can see that you marked this first and then you erased it or whatever, changed it to something else. And I got to tell you, a very high percentage of the time, more times than not, the first answer was the right answer. So look, I'm not saying if you think you need to change an answer, then change it. I'm not saying don't change your answer. But what I am saying is this. What I think a lot of times we do is we'll mark the answer and then we'll start questioning ourselves. And we question ourselves to the point where we talk ourselves into changing it to the wrong answer, even though we had it right to begin with. So, and I know when I'm taking an exam myself, and I've just learned to do this, it's just the way I do it. I read that question and I answer it. I mean, I just go ahead, I go with what I think is the best answer and I'm moving on. But I have seen too many times. I bet, if you change your answer 5 times for 5 questions, you change the answer to something else, I'd be willing to at least 3, if not 4 of them you had right before to start with. Y'all, there's a reason why you went with that answer the first time. There's a reason you went with that. And then we start second guessing ourselves, questioning ourselves. And that's where, I'd be careful. I would make, if you're going to change an answer, you better know beyond a shadow of a doubt, this is the right answer. I don't know if that's what you were looking for, but that's about the best I can tell you.
I have one last question.
Okay.
It's about the licensing. So if your licenses are active and just say, hey, life comes and you need to put it in the inactive, which is on hold, do you still have to do the continued education class the every 2 years and pay the fees, even though they're inactive?
Good question. If it's inactive, you do not have to take continuing ed while it's inactive. You do have to renew it every 2 years, which means you got to pay the renewal fee. But you do not have to take the continuing education. Now, with a caveat here, when you go back to put it back on active status, if you had it inactive for more than 2 years, before they'll allow you to go back to active, they will require you to complete the mandatory continuing education training. If it's been there more than 2 years.
Okay, makes sense.
Okay. But say, for example, it was inactive for 5 years. Obviously, that's over 2 years. So before they would let you go back to active, they would require you to complete, in South Carolina, 10 hours of continuing education. So once you completed that 10 hours, then they'd let you put it back on active status. But while it's inactive, you don't have to do continuing ed.
Okay.
Okay. Any more? Sounds like we're about to wind down here.
I'm good so far to next week.
Okay. All right, anybody else? Or y'all done? Going once.
I am good.
JJ.
All set, Frankie. Thank you.
All righty.
See you next week, same time, same place.
All righty. Well, y'all be good. Hope you have a wonderful week.
Thank you.
I'll take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye.